Silver Creek Valley, Wyoming Territory, 1887. The blizzard raged like a living thing, howling across the valley with teeth of ice and claws of wind. It was the kind that swallowed men whole and left no trace come spring, thaw the kind that old-timers spoke of in hushed tones around tavern fires. Silas Morgan stood at his cabin window, watching the wall of white obliterate the world beyond his porch. 38 years of life had left their mark on his face, not in wrinkles, but in the haunted green eyes that had seen too much death during the war. A tin cup of whiskey warmed his palm, though nothing seemed to warm his soul these days. 10 years he'd lived in this valley. 10 years since he'd hung up his surgeon's tools and Union Army uniform. 10 years of blessed solitude. The clock on the mantel read just past midnight. He was about to turn away when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the swirling chaos of white. It couldn't be. No one would be fool enough to be out in such weather, no one who valued their life. Then he saw it again. A shape hunched and struggling, moving toward his cabin with painful slowness. Silas set down his cup. The whiskey, forgotten. A familiar tightness gripped his chest, the herald of the panic that sometimes still seized him when memories of the war pressed too close. The screams of dying boys, the smell of gangrene, the endless flow of blood. He pushed it down, focusing on his breathing, as Dr. Kellerman had taught him after the war. The shape disappeared in a gust of white. He counted to 10, willing it to reappear. When it didn't, he cursed under his breath and reached for his heavy coat. He'd sworn never to take a life again after the war, but he'd never sworn to let someone die on his doorstep. The wind hit him like a physical blow as he stepped onto the porch. The cold clawed at his face, searching for any exposed skin to bite. He was about to retreat when he heard it faint but unmistakable beneath the wind's howl. A knock, not on the cabin door, but on the side of the porch, as if someone had collapsed against it. Silas moved toward the sound, his boots crunching through fresh fallen snow. He rounded the corner and found them. A woman, her face nearly blue with cold, knelt in the snow. Her clothes, once fine, but now torn and muddied, were crusted with ice. In her arms, pressed tight against her chest, was a child. A little girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, her eyes closed, snow gathering in her pale lashes. The woman raised her head at Silas's approach, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and marked by something darker than mere cold fear. Pure animal fear. "Those men," she whispered through cracked lips, "they killed my husband. They'll take my daughter." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she slumped forward. Silas moved instinctively, catching both mother and child before they hit the snow. The girl's eyes fluttered open for a moment, startling blue like cornflowers before closing again. "Help us," the woman breathed, and then she was unconscious, a dead weight in his arms. Without hesitation, Silas gathered them both up, the woman over his shoulder. The child cradled in his other arm and carried them into the warmth of his cabin, leaving the howling night behind. As the door closed against the storm, he couldn't know that he had just invited in a tempest of another kind, one that would forever change the course of 3 lives. Eleanor Whitman dreamed of fire and woke to the crackle of a hearth. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, afraid to open her eyes. The last thing she remembered was cold, bone-deep, soul-stealing cold, and the desperate fear that her daughter would freeze to death in her arms before they found shelter. Lily. Where was Lily? Panic surged through her, and she sat bolt upright, ignoring the wave of dizziness that followed. She was in a small, neat room dominated by a stone fireplace. Lily? Her voice came out as a rasp, her throat raw from the cold. She's sleeping. The deep voice came from the shadows beyond the fireplace's glow. Eleanor turned sharply, wincing at the pain that shot through her side. A man sat in a rocking chair, his face half hidden in darkness. He was large, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard streaked with gray. His eyes, when they caught the firelight, were a startling green, intelligent eyes, but guarded, wary. "Where is she?" Eleanor demanded, fighting to keep the tremor from her voice. She'd learned long ago that showing fear to strange men was rarely wise. The man nodded toward a small trundle bed pushed against the far wall. Eleanor saw the small lump beneath the blankets, the familiar tumble of golden curls against the pillow. Lily's chest rose and fell in the peaceful rhythm of deep sleep. Relief made her limbs weak, and Eleanor sank back against the pillows. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more profoundly than she could express. The man said nothing. He simply watched her with those unreadable green eyes. There was something unsettling in his stillness, in the careful way he held himself like a man constantly braced for impact. "You're safe here," he finally said, his voice low and rough, as if rarely used. "For now." "I'm Eleanor Whitman," she offered, hoping to break through his reserve. "That's my daughter Lily." She waited for him to reciprocate, but he merely nodded. After a long, uncomfortable silence, he spoke again. "You have 2 broken ribs, bruising across your back and shoulders, signs of exposure. The child is better off. Children her age are remarkably resilient, but she was starting to show signs of frostbite on her fingers and toes." And he spoke clinically, like a doctor cataloging symptoms. "Are you a physician?" Eleanor asked, her teacher's curiosity momentarily overriding her caution. Something flashed across his face, pain perhaps, or anger, before his expression settled back into careful neutrality. "I was, once." Another silence fell, broken only by the pop and hiss of the fire and Lily's soft breathing. "Those men you mentioned," he said suddenly, "before you lost consciousness, who are they?" Eleanor's hands fisted in the blankets. The memory of Judge Blackwood's cold eyes as he ordered his men to make her talk sent a shudder through her that had nothing to do with the lingering chill in her bones. "Judge Harlan Blackwood," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He runs Silver Creek. My husband Edmund was a schoolmaster turned miner. He found a silver vein on our property last autumn, not just any vein, but one that could change our fortunes forever. He went to file the claim, but—" Her voice caught. "He never came home. They said it was an accident in the mine, but Edmund was careful. He knew those tunnels better than he knew our small farm." "And the child?" the man prompted when she fell silent. "Judge believes Edmund hid a map showing the main vein's location." Eleanor explained, her voice lowering instinctively, as if the judge might somehow hear her. "He's right. My husband didn't trust the judge or his men, so he hid the map where only I would know to look." Her voice hardened. "When I refused to tell the judge where it was, he decided to take Lily as leverage. Said she'd be well cared for in his house as his ward until I remembered where the map was." The man's jaw tightened visibly. "So you ran." "We had no choice. The judge's men came to our house that night. I grabbed Lily and escaped out the back. We've been running for 3 days, staying off the main roads." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I didn't know where to go. We had so little time to prepare. The storm caught us on the mountain pass. I thought we were going to die out there." The man rose abruptly, moving to the hearth to add another log to the fire. The flames caught and flared, illuminating the cabin fully for the first time. Eleanor saw that it was larger than she had initially thought, a single room with a dividing curtain, that was currently pulled back. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A desk in the corner was covered with papers and what looked like medical journals. "You didn't tell me your name," Eleanor said softly. He kept his back to her shoulders tense. "Silas," he finally said. "Silas Morgan." "Well, Mr. Morgan." "Just Silas." "Silas," she amended. "What happens now?" He turned then, and Eleanor was struck by the weariness in his face. This was a man who carried a great burden, though of what nature she couldn't guess. "You rest," he said. "Heal. The storm won't let up for at least 2 more days. After that," he shrugged. "After that, we'll see." With that, he moved toward the front door, shrugging into a heavy coat. "Where are you going?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. "To check on the animals. I'll be back." He paused at the door hand on the latch. "Bolt this behind me." Then he was gone, swallowed by the howling white beyond the door. Eleanor stared at the closed door for a long moment before forcing herself to her feet. Pain lanced through her ribs, but she ignored it, crossing to the door and sliding the heavy bolt into place. Only then did she allow herself to go to Lily's side. Her daughter's face was peaceful in sleep, her breathing easy. Eleanor brushed a curl from her forehead, marveling as always at the softness of her skin, the delicate arch of her brows, so like Edmund's. "We're safe for now, little flower," she whispered. "We're safe." But as she gazed around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the medical texts, the isolation, she wondered what manner of man had taken them in, and whether they had merely exchanged one danger for another. Silas leaned into the wind, forcing his way through thigh-deep snow toward the barn. The cold was a living presence, pressing against him from all sides, seeking entry through every seam in his clothing. He welcomed it. The physical discomfort helped anchor him in the present, away from the memories her presence had stirred. A woman and a child. In his home. The very scenario he'd sworn to avoid at all costs. The barn door took all his strength to push open against the drifting snow. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horse greeted him. His 2 workhorses, Thunder and Storm, nickered softly from their stalls. The milk cow Bessie regarded him with placid eyes. The animal's warmth had kept the worst of the cold at bay in here. Silas moved mechanically through his chores, filling water troughs, distributing feed. The physical labor was soothing, mindless. But his thoughts kept returning to the cabin, to the woman with determination etched into every line of her face, even in unconsciousness. To the child, so small and vulnerable. To the marks he'd seen on Eleanor's back when he'd undressed her to tend her injuries. They weren't from running or exposure. Those were deliberate, methodical. The kind of marks left by a whip, wielded with precision. Silas's hands tightened on the pitchfork he was holding. The metal creaked in protest, and he forced himself to relax his grip. He'd seen such marks before during the war. On escaped slaves. On prisoners. On the bodies of men and women who'd been interrogated for information. Tortured. The judge hadn't just threatened to take her child. He'd tortured Eleanor Whitman for information. A wave of nausea swept over him, followed by a surge of rage so intense his vision blurred at the edges. It was an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time, not since the last battlefield, the last tent full of dying boys he couldn't save. The rage was quickly followed by fear, not for himself, but for what the rage represented. The part of himself he'd locked away after the war, the part that had seen and done terrible things in the name of a cause he'd believed in. The part he'd sworn never to let surface again. Silas leaned against the barn wall, closing his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. again, again, until the red haze receded and he could think clearly once more. They couldn't stay. The woman and her child. As soon as the storm broke, he'd have to send them on their way. Give them provisions directions to the next town over, not Silver Creek, but maybe Riverton or Laramie. Somewhere beyond this judge's reach. It was the only option. He couldn't get involved. Couldn't risk what might happen if he did. Couldn't risk failing them like he'd failed Sarah. The memory of his wife's face rose unbidden, her fever-bright eyes, her desperate gasps for air, as the influenza ravaged her lungs, her hand growing cold in his, despite everything he knew, everything he tried. And the child, their son unborn, lost with his mother. A family extinguished while Silas was miles away trying to save strangers on a battlefield. With a final check on the animals, Silas headed back to the cabin, hunching against the wind that seemed determined to drive him to his knees. By the time he reached the porch, snow caked his beard and eyebrows, and his fingers were numb despite his heavy gloves. He knocked 3 times a signal he'd told Eleanor to listen for. The bolt slid back after a moment, and the door opened to reveal Eleanor, pale but steady on her feet. "The animals?" she asked, surprising him. Silas nodded, stamping snow from his boots before entering. "They're fine." He shrugged out of his coat and hung it by the door, then removed his boots. The domesticity of the moment struck him suddenly, a woman waiting for his return, asking about his chores. It was so achingly normal, so far removed from the solitary existence he'd carved out for himself. "I made tea," Eleanor said, gesturing to the steaming pot on the stove. "I hope that's all right. I wanted to do something useful." "You should be resting," Silas replied, but there was no real admonishment in his tone. He understood the need to be useful, to exert what little control one could in circumstances beyond one's control. "I've rested enough," she said firmly. She looked around at the cabin, her gaze lingering on the bookshelf. "You have quite a collection." "Reading passes the time," Silas said, pouring himself a cup of the tea. It was strong and fragrant. She'd found the wild mint he kept dried for such purposes. "Were you a teacher before you were a doctor?" She asked, her voice casual, but Silas caught the note of assessment beneath. "No," he replied. "My father was a professor. Books were a connection to him." He hadn't spoken of his father in years, and the words felt strange on his tongue. "I was a teacher," Eleanor offered, "before I married Edmund. A schoolhouse in Montana Territory, children of all ages." Silas nodded, not sure how to respond to this piece of her history. They lapsed into silence, sipping their tea. It wasn't entirely uncomfortable, this quiet between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the endless howl of the wind. When Eleanor winced, shifting in her chair to ease the pressure on her ribs, Silas set down his cup. "Let me check your bandages," he said, his doctor's instincts overriding his reticence. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, a flush rising to her cheeks. Silas knelt before her, his movements careful and clinical, as he reached for the hem of the borrowed shirt she wore. "May I?" he asked. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor nodded. Silas lifted the shirt just enough to expose the bandages he'd wrapped around her midsection while she was unconscious. The wrappings were still in place, but he wanted to check for any sign of internal bleeding, increased bruising or swelling. "Breathe in," he instructed. Slowly. Eleanor complied. Silas watched the expansion of her rib cage, listening for any catch or wheeze that might indicate a punctured lung rather than just a break. "Now out!" She released the breath in a controlled stream. "No wheezing. Good. Any coughing blood in your saliva?" "No. Pain when you breathe, scale of 1 to 10. 4, Maybe 5 if I breathe too deeply. Silas nodded, satisfied. The binding is holding well. Try to avoid any sudden movements or lifting. He started to pull the shirt back down, but Eleanor caught his wrist, surprising him with the strength of her grip. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked quietly. "The marks." Silas met her eyes. There was no shame there, only a fierce determination that he found himself respecting. "Yes. Judge Blackwood's men did that. 3 days of questioning before I managed to escape." Her voice was steady, but Silas could see the slight tremor in her hand. "They thought pain would make me reveal the map's location." "Did it?" The question was blunt, but Silas needed to know what they were dealing with. Eleanor's chin lifted. "No, and it won't, no matter what they do to me." Her gaze flicked to the trundle bed where Lily still slept. "But if they get their hands on Lily—" The unspoken fear hung between them. Silas had seen what desperate men would do to get what they wanted. Had seen the aftermath of such desperation in his field hospital, men, women, even children, broken in body and spirit. "They won't," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "You don't know Judge Blackwood. He controls everything in Silver Creek, the law, the businesses, even the church. He has men everywhere." "Not here," Silas said firmly. "Not in this valley." Eleanor studied him, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. Silas resisted the urge to turn away from her scrutiny. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked. "You live alone out here, miles from anywhere. You clearly value your privacy. Yet you take in 2 strangers in the middle of a blizzard, tend their injuries, offer them shelter." Silas's jaw tightened. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself since he'd carried them through his door. "Would you prefer I'd left you to freeze?" he asked, deflecting. "No, but most men would have done just enough to ease their conscience. You did more." Her eyes held his. "You treated my wounds like a doctor. You checked Lily for frostbite and made sure she was comfortable before you even started on me. You've given us your food, your clothes, your bed. It's the decent thing to do. Decency is rare in these parts, Mr. Morgan." Silas sighed, running a hand through his beard. "Just Silas," he reminded her. "Silas, then. You still haven't answered my question." He stood, putting distance between them. The real answer was too complicated, too tied up in memories he'd rather not revisit. "I took an oath," he said finally. "First, do no harm." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. The Hippocratic Oath had been his guiding principle once before the war, forced him to weigh one life against another, to make choices no man should have to make. "A doctor's oath," Eleanor murmured. Silas didn't respond. He moved to the stove, busying himself with pouring another cup of tea. "You said you were a doctor once," Eleanor pressed. "What happened?" "The war happened." The words were clipped final. "You should rest more. Your body needs it to heal." He handed her the fresh cup of tea, a clear signal that the conversation was over. To his relief, Eleanor accepted both the tea and the implied dismissal. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Silas nodded once, then moved to the desk in the corner, putting his back to her. He heard her soft footsteps as she returned to the bed, the creak of the frame as she settled onto it. He stared blindly at the medical journal open on the desk, not really seeing the words on the page. Instead, his mind filled with images from the past, the field hospital at Antietam, the endless stream of broken bodies, the impossible choices, and later the lonely cabin in Illinois. Sarah's fevered face as the influenza took hold, her hand growing cold in his, despite everything he knew, everything he tried. Silas closed his eyes against the memories. He'd done what he could for the Whitmans. Once the storm passed, they would move on. They had to, because everyone Silas Morgan tried to save eventually died, and he couldn't bear to watch it happen again. The blizzard raged for 3 days. 3 days of enforced proximity in the small cabin. 3 days of Silas moving like a ghost around his own home, speaking only when necessary, retreating to the barn for hours despite the cold. 3 days of Lily gradually losing her initial shyness around the large, silent man with the sad eyes. Eleanor watched amazed as her normally reserved daughter gravitated toward Silas with increasing boldness. By the morning of the second day, Lily was following him around the cabin, asking questions in her clear, piping voice. "Why is your beard so big? Do birds nest in it? Can I touch it? Why don't you smile?" "My daddy smiled all the time. He's in heaven now. Do you know anyone in heaven?" Silas answered each question with a patience that surprised Eleanor, given his obvious discomfort with their presence. His responses were brief, often monosyllabic, but never unkind. "Keeps my face warm. No, if you want. Not much to smile about. Yes, I know people there." By the third day, Lily had taken to sitting at his feet, while he read, playing with a small carved wooden horse he'd produced from some hidden corner of the cabin. Occasionally Silas would glance down at her, and Eleanor could swear she saw the ghost of a smile flicker across his face there and gone so quickly it might have been imagined. It was on the evening of the third day that the storm finally broke. The wind died down to a gentle murmur, and the constant drum of snow against the windows ceased. Silas stood at the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. Moonlight spilled across unbroken fields of white, turning the world into a glittering alien place. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, coming to stand beside him. Silas glanced at her, then back at the scene outside. "Deceptively so," he replied. "That much snow makes travel dangerous. Drifts can be 10 feet deep in places. Hidden crevasses. Avalanches on the slopes." Eleanor's heart sank. "So we're still trapped here." Silas was silent for a long moment. "For a few more days, yes. The snow needs time to settle and compact. The path to town won't be passable for at least that long." Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her relief. The longer they stayed hidden, the better chance they had of throwing off Judge Blackwood's men. And despite Silas's reserved nature, she felt safe here in a way she hadn't since Edmund's death. "I'm sorry to impose on you further," she said formally. Silas shrugged. "Can't control the weather." They stood in companionable silence, watching the moon cast blue shadows across the snow. From the bed, Lily's soft snores punctuated the quiet. "She likes you," Eleanor said softly. "Lily, she doesn't usually take to strangers." Silas shifted uncomfortably. "Children are resilient, adaptable. It's more than that. She senses something in you." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Something good." Silas looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her assessment. "She doesn't know me." "Perhaps she knows the parts that matter," Eleanor countered gently. Before Silas could respond, there was a sound outside, the crunch of snow under boots. Instantly, his posture changed, tension radiating from every line of his body. He moved to the window, careful to stay to one side out of sight from outside. "Stay back," he warned Eleanor in a low voice. "Get Lily, and go behind the curtain." Eleanor's heart raced as she gathered Lily, who had been playing near the hearth, and ushered her behind the dividing curtain. "What is it?" she whispered. "Someone's coming," Silas replied, reaching for his coat. "Stay here. Stay quiet." Eleanor watched through a crack in the curtain as Silas slipped out the door, closing it silently behind him. Lily clung to her, sensing her mother's fear. "Is it the bad men?" she whispered. "I don't know, little flower," Eleanor replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "But Mr. Silas will protect us." The minutes stretched endlessly as they waited. Eleanor strained to hear any sounds from outside, but the cabin's thick walls muffled everything. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the door opened and Silas stepped back inside. He wasn't alone. A man in a sheriff's uniform followed him, removing his hat as he entered. He was older than Silas, perhaps 50, with graying hair and a weathered face, marked by deep lines around the eyes and mouth. His posture was upright military, though his expression was weary. "Mrs. Whitman," Silas said, his voice tense but controlled. "This is Sheriff Daniel Cooper from Silver Creek. He's an old friend." Eleanor stepped out from behind the curtain, keeping Lily behind her. "Sheriff," she said cautiously. The sheriff nodded to her. "Ma'am, miss." The last was directed at Lily, who peeked around Eleanor's skirts with wide, fearful eyes. "Cooper served with me during the war," Silas explained. "He's not here on the judge's behalf." "Not directly," Cooper amended, his voice grave. "But that's why I came. Judge Blackwood has search parties combing the mountains for you and your daughter, Mrs. Whitman. They're working outward from Silver Creek methodical-like. At the rate they're moving, they could reach this valley within 2 days." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. 2 days. That's not enough time. My ribs. "I know," Cooper said, his expression sympathetic. "And the snow makes travel difficult. That's why I came to warn you." He glanced at Silas. "I've told Doc here about a possible alternative, a safer place to hide, at least temporarily." "Victoria Blackwood," Silas said, looking at Eleanor. "The judge's adoptive daughter. She runs a saloon in Silver Creek called the Silver Spur. According to Cooper, she has hidden rooms where she shelters people from the judge's attention." Eleanor stared at them both in disbelief. "Go back to Silver Creek. That's madness. If the judge's men find us there—" "They won't be looking there," Cooper interjected. "They're convinced you've fled into the mountains, or toward Laramie. The last place they'd expect to find you is right under their noses in a building owned by the judge's own daughter." "Why would she help us?" Eleanor demanded. "What possible reason would the judge's daughter have to betray him?" Cooper and Silas exchanged a glance that Eleanor couldn't interpret. "Victoria Blackwood isn't what she seems," Cooper said carefully. "She has her own reasons for opposing the judge, reasons that might be personal where you're concerned." Eleanor frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means she's been helping women escape the judge's attention for years," Cooper replied, "and it means she might have a connection to your family that the judge doesn't know about." The implications of this statement hung in the air. Eleanor looked at Lily, who was watching the adults with solemn eyes, then back at the two men. "What kind of connection?" Cooper shook his head. "I don't know details, just whispers, rumors. But Victoria is no friend to the judge, despite appearances." Eleanor turned to Silas. "What do you think?" Silas ran a hand through his beard, his expression troubled. "I think we don't have many options. The trail to Laramie would be treacherous in this snow, especially with your injuries and Lily. But returning to Silver Creek," he shook his head, "it's a risk either way." "I need to think," Eleanor said, feeling overwhelmed. "This is Lily's life we're talking about. I can't make a mistake." "Of course," Cooper said, nodding. "But don't take too long. Those search parties won't stop until they find you, or the judge calls them off." Eleanor looked down at Lily, who was watching the adults with eyes too old for her young face. Whatever decision she made would determine her daughter's fate. She couldn't afford to choose wrong. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep and Cooper had departed with a promise to return the next day, Eleanor found herself unable to rest. The decision before her weighed heavily on her mind, each option fraught with its own dangers. Silas had retired to the chair by the fire, a medical journal open in his lap, though Eleanor noticed he hadn't turned a page in over an hour. His mind seemed as troubled as hers. Quietly, so as not to wake Lily, Eleanor rose from the bed and moved to sit in the chair opposite Silas. He looked up, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I can't sleep," she said unnecessarily. Silas closed the journal. "Understandable." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "I've been thinking about the map," she said suddenly. "The one the judge wants so badly." Silas's attention sharpened. "What about it?" "Edmund didn't just hide it. He encoded it." Eleanor's voice took on a note of pride. "My husband wasn't educated in the traditional sense, but he was clever. The map is hidden within a series of markings on a piece of leather, his belt. To anyone else, they would look like simple decorative tooling. But to someone who knew what to look for—" "And you know what to look for," Silas guessed. Eleanor nodded. "Edmund showed me just before he left to file the claim. He was worried, though. He tried to hide it from me." Her eyes misted with memory. "He said, 'If anything happens to me, Ellie, you take this and run. The silver's worth a fortune, enough to set you and Lily up for life.'" She blinked back tears. "I didn't think I'd need to use it. I thought he was being cautious, paranoid even. But then he didn't come back," Silas finished softly. Eleanor nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "The judge's men searched our house after Edmund's accident, but they never thought to look at the belt I was wearing. It was Edmund's, you see, but I'd taken to wearing it after he died. It was too big, but it made me feel closer to him." "You still have it?" Silas asked. "Yes." Eleanor's hand went to her waist, where the belt was cinched tight, hidden beneath the oversized shirt she wore. "I never take it off." Silas leaned forward, his expression intense. "So the judge was right. The map does exist." "Yes, but he'll never find it. Not unless—" She trailed off, the implication clear. "Not unless he captured her and forced her to reveal its location. Or, worse, used Lily as leverage." Silas's jaw tightened. "All the more reason to get you far from Silver Creek." "Or all the more reason to return," Eleanor countered, surprising herself with the words. Silas's eyebrows shot up. "What? Think about it, Silas. The judge will never stop hunting us as long as he believes we have the map. He's too greedy, too determined." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice gaining conviction. "But what if we could use that against him? What if we could end this once and for all?" "How?" Silas asked, though the wariness in his eyes suggested he already had an inkling. "We go to Victoria Blackwood. We hide in her secret rooms. And while we're there, we find evidence of the judge's crimes, not just against us, but against others. Sheriff Cooper said he's been doing this for years, terrorizing the town. There must be others who would testify against him if given the chance and protection." Silas stared at her. "You're talking about bringing down the judge, a man who controls an entire town." "Yes," Eleanor said simply, "for Lily, for Edmund, for everyone he's hurt." "It's too dangerous," Silas protested. "The judge's reach is not unlimited," Eleanor cut in. "You said it yourself. The law still matters, even in places like Silver Creek. If we could gather enough evidence, get it to a federal marshal or a circuit judge—" Silas ran a hand through his beard, his expression troubled. "You're assuming Victoria Blackwood will help with this plan. That she's as opposed to her father as Cooper believes. That's a significant risk. Every option is a risk, Eleanor pointed out. At least this one offers a chance at a real future, not just an endless flight from the judge's men. If we do this, Silas said slowly, if we go back to Silver Creek and seek out Victoria Blackwood, it won't just be your lives at risk. It will be mine as well. And Cooper's. I know, Eleanor acknowledged. I wouldn't ask if I saw another way. Silas's expression darkened. You're not asking, Eleanor. I'm offering. There's a difference. The echo of her own words from their earlier conversation wasn't lost on Eleanor. She reached across the space between them, laying her hand on Silas's arm. He tensed at the contact, but didn't pull away. I know what I'm suggesting is dangerous, she said softly. And I wouldn't blame you if you chose to stay here safe in your valley. You've already done more for us than anyone could expect. Silas looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a decision made, a path chosen. If we do this, he said, his voice low and intent, we do it my way, carefully, with planning. No unnecessary risks. Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest. Does that mean you'll help us? It means I won't let you go alone, Silas replied, whether that's to Laramie or to Silver Creek. He paused. But if you're determined to confront the judge to end this, rather than just escape it, then yes, I'll help you. Eleanor squeezed his arm, overwhelmed with gratitude, and something more, something she wasn't ready to name. Thank you, Silas. He nodded once, then gently removed his arm from her touch. We should rest. Tomorrow we'll need to prepare. If the judge's men are as close as Cooper believes, we may need to move soon. Eleanor rose, understanding the dismissal, but as she turned to go back to the bed, she shared with Lily a thought struck her. Silas? He looked up, eyebrow raised in question. Why are you really helping us? She asked softly. And don't tell me it's just your doctor's oath or basic decency. It's more than that, isn't it? Silas was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. I had a wife once, Sarah, and a son on the way. His eyes were fixed on the fire, seeing not flames, but ghosts. While I was away during the war, influenza swept through our town. By the time I got the telegram, by the time I could get home, it was too late. Eleanor's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Silas. He continued as if he hadn't heard her. I was a doctor. I'd saved countless men on the battlefield, but I couldn't save my own wife, my own child. His hands tightened on the arms of the chair. After that, I couldn't bear to practice medicine anymore. Couldn't bear to fail anyone else, like I'd failed them. So you came here, Eleanor murmured. To escape. To punish myself. Silas corrected, his voice harsh. To ensure I could never hurt anyone again. Never give false hope. Never make promises I couldn't keep. Eleanor moved back to him, kneeling beside his chair, forcing him to look at her. Silas, what happened to your family wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. I should have been there, he insisted. Instead, I was hundreds of miles away, cutting off boys' limbs in a field hospital, all for a cause that seemed less and less righteous with each passing day. Eleanor reached up hesitantly and laid her palm against his bearded cheek. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Lily matters, she said softly. To me. And I think she's starting to matter to you, too. Silas closed his eyes, pain etched in every line of his face. That's what I'm afraid of, he admitted. Caring again, risking again. Living again, Eleanor corrected. Silas, You've been punishing yourself for 10 years for something that was beyond your control. Maybe, maybe it's time to forgive yourself, to try again." Silas's eyes opened, meeting hers, with a vulnerability that took her breath away. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You already are," Eleanor said. "By helping us, by choosing to leave this sanctuary you've built. That's a start." Silas didn't respond, but he didn't pull away from her touch either. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by her hand on his face, and by the shared understanding of loss, of pain, of the tentative hope for something more. Finally, Silas reached up and gently removed her hand, but he held it for a moment before letting go. "We should sleep." He repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." As she settled onto the bed beside Lily, Eleanor's mind whirled with all she had learned about Silas Morgan, with the plan taking shape for their return to Silver Creek, with the dangers that lay ahead. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small spark of hope glowed. Not just for their survival, but for something more. For healing. For a new beginning. For Silas, who had been alone for so long, punishing himself for a tragedy he couldn't have prevented. For herself, who had thought her heart died with Edmund. And for Lily, who deserved more than a life spent running from a powerful man's greed. With those thoughts, Eleanor finally drifted to sleep, her hand unconsciously going to Edmund's belt around her waist, where the map to a silver fortune and perhaps their future lay hidden in plain sight. Outside, the moon rose over the snow-covered valley, casting silver light on a world transformed by winter's touch. And in the distance, barely visible through the trees, the glow of torches marked the approach of the judge's men, coming ever closer to the cabin where 2 women and 1 man slept, unaware that their time of relative safety was running out faster than any of them could have guessed. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. Silas stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the breath cloud before his face in the frigid morning air. In the tree line to the east, he could see them pinpricks of light from torches still distant, but drawing steadily closer. The judge's men methodical in their search, unwavering in their purpose. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Eleanor stepped out, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She followed his gaze to the distant lights. "They're coming," she said, not a question. Silas nodded once. Cooper was right about their path. They'll reach the cabin by nightfall. Eleanor drew a shaky breath. "Then we need to leave before they arrive." "Yes." Silas turned to her, his expression grave. "Have you made your decision, Laramie or Silver Creek?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Silver Creek. Victoria Blackwood. It's the only chance we have of ending this for good." Silas had known what her answer would be even before he asked. He'd seen the determination in her eyes the night before, the steel beneath the softness. Eleanor Whitman was not a woman who would spend her life running. "Then we need to move quickly," he said. "Pack only what's essential. I'll ready the horses." Eleanor nodded and disappeared back inside. Silas headed for the barn, his mind racing through the preparations needed for their journey. They would have to travel light and fast. The route to Silver Creek was shorter than the one to Laramie, a day's ride in normal conditions, but the snow would slow them considerably. In the barn, thunder and storm nickered softly as he entered. Silas moved automatically through the familiar tasks, feeding, watering, checking hooves, preparing saddles. As he worked, he found himself cataloging everything he was leaving behind. The sanctuary he'd built over a decade. The isolation that had been both his punishment and his shield. All of it abandoned for a widow and her daughter he'd known barely a week. The thought should have unsettled him more than it did. Instead, as he tightened the cinch on Thunder's saddle, Silas felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Not the hollow routine of survival, but a true reason to move forward. Whether that purpose led to salvation or destruction remained to be seen. By the time he returned to the cabin, Eleanor had packed their meager belongings into 2 small bundles. Lily sat at the table solemnly eating a bowl of porridge, her blue eyes wide, with the understanding that something important was happening. "We're going on an adventure," Eleanor was explaining gently, "like in your storybook. Remember the one about the princess who has to travel in disguise?" Lily nodded, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Will there be dragons?" "No dragons," Eleanor assured her. "But we'll need to be very quiet and very brave. Can you do that for me, little flower?" "I can be brave," Lily said with the simple confidence of childhood. "Mr. Silas will protect us." Eleanor's eyes met Silas's over her daughter's head. The trust in the child's statement hung heavy in the air between them. "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "He will." Silas looked away, uncomfortable with the faith they placed in him. "The horses are ready," he said gruffly. "We should eat quickly and be on our way." As Eleanor prepared a simple breakfast, Silas moved to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside lay his old service revolver, untouched for years. He had sworn never to take a life again after the war, but he couldn't in good conscience leave it behind. Not when Eleanor and Lily's safety might depend on it. With reluctant hands he checked the cylinder, finding it loaded just as he had left it. He tucked the weapon into his coat pocket, its weight unfamiliar and unwelcome. While Eleanor and Lily finished their meal, Silas made one last survey of his cabin. His eyes lingered on the bookshelf, the medical journals, the small wooden chest containing his surgical instruments. 10 years of solitude contained within these walls. He expected to feel regret, or at least hesitation. Instead, he felt only resolve. Whatever happened in Silver Creek, he would not be returning to this life of isolation. One way or another, his path was changing. "We're ready," Eleanor said from behind him. Silas turned. Eleanor stood with Lily's hand in hers, both dressed in the warmest clothing he had been able to provide. Layers of wool and fur, much of it too large but serviceable nonetheless. "Mr. Silas," Lily said, her voice small but clear, "can I bring Maple?" She held up the wooden horse he had given her. Something caught in Silas's throat. He knelt to her level, meeting her eyes. "Of course you can. Every traveler needs a companion." Lily's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Without warning, she threw her arms around his neck in a quick, fierce hug, then darted back to her mother's side. Silas rose slowly, caught off guard by the simple gesture and the emotions it stirred. Eleanor watched him with understanding in her eyes, but mercifully said nothing. "Let's go," he said, his voice rougher than usual. They left through the back door, away from the direction of the approaching search party. Silas led them to the barn, where the horses waited, already saddled and packed with supplies. He helped Eleanor mount Thunder, then lifted Lily to sit in front of her. "Hold on tight to your mother," he instructed Lily. "And remember, we need to be very quiet on our journey." Lily nodded solemnly, clutching Maple the wooden horse in one small hand, her other arm wrapped around the saddle horn. Silas mounted Storm, a sturdy black gelding with a calm temperament. With a final glance at the cabin, his home for a decade now abandoned, he nudged his horse forward, leading them away from the search party's lights and into the shadow of the western ridge. They traveled in silence through the morning, following a narrow trail that wound through the pine forest blanketing the mountainside. The horses picked their way carefully through the snow, their breath steaming in the cold air. Silas led them along a route few knew existed, an old mining trail that had fallen into disuse after the silver boom of the previous decade. It was longer than the main road to Silver Creek, but it would keep them away from the judge's search parties. By midday, they stopped in a sheltered hollow to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Lily, who had been remarkably quiet and patient throughout the morning's ride, now explored the small clearing with cautious curiosity, examining snow-laden pine boughs and the tracks of small animals. "She's doing well," Silas observed to Eleanor, who was watching her daughter with vigilant eyes. "She's stronger than she looks," Eleanor replied. "Edmund used to say she had an old soul." Silas nodded, seeing the truth of it in the child's solemn eyes and quiet determination. "The trail ahead gets steeper. We'll need to move slower, be more careful. How far are we from Silver Creek?" "If the weather holds, we should reach the outskirts by dusk. Cooper will meet us at the edge of town and take us to the Silver Spur." Silas hesitated, then added, "Once we're there, things will become more complicated." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "You don't trust Victoria Blackwood." "I don't know her," Silas corrected. "Cooper seems to think she's trustworthy, but Cooper also wears a badge in a town controlled by the judge. His position is precarious." "You think he might be leading us into a trap?" Silas shook his head. "No. Cooper and I served together. I trust him with my life." His eyes met hers. "But I've learned that even good men can be forced into bad choices when the people they care about are threatened." Eleanor absorbed this, her expression grave. "So we trust but cautiously." "Exactly." Their conversation was interrupted by Lily's return. "Mama, look!" she exclaimed, holding out her mittened hands. In her palms rested a perfect pine cone dusted with snow. "It's for you." Eleanor smiled, accepting the gift. "Thank you, little flower. It's beautiful. I found one for Mr. Silas, too." Lily produced a second pine cone from her pocket and offered it to him shyly. Silas stared at the small offering, momentarily at a loss. Then, with careful hands, he accepted it. "Thank you, Lily." The child beamed at him, pleased by his acceptance. "You can keep it in your pocket, and then you'll always have a piece of the forest with you." Silas nodded gravely and tucked the pine cone into his coat pocket. "I will." As they resumed their journey, the pine cone pressed against his side a small, unexpected weight. Like the child who had given it to him, it was simultaneously fragile and remarkably resilient. Silas found himself touching it periodically as they rode a talisman against the dangers that lay ahead. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally caught sight of Silver Creek in the valley below. From their vantage point on the ridge, the town looked almost peaceful, smoke rising from chimneys, the steeple of the white church piercing the blue winter sky, the main street dusted with snow that glittered in the late afternoon light. But Silas knew appearances were deceiving. Behind the picturesque facade lay corruption and fear, all emanating from the imposing structure at the town's northern end, the judge's mansion. Even from this distance, it dominated the landscape, 3 stories of dark stone and gabled windows, a statement of power as much as a residence. "Is that where he lives?" Eleanor asked, following his gaze. Silas nodded. "The judge likes to look down on his domain." Eleanor's arms tightened around Lily, who had fallen asleep against her, exhausted by the long ride. "It looks like a fortress." "In many ways it is." Idlaz turned his horse away from the overlook. "We'll go down through the eastern ravine. It's steeper, but less exposed." They began the careful descent, the horses picking their way down the snow-covered slope with practiced caution. As they descended, the temperature dropped with the sun, and shadows lengthened across the land. By the time they reached the tree line at the edge of town, Twilight had settled over Silver Creek. Lights were coming on in windows and the streets were emptying as townsfolk retreated to the warmth of their homes. Silas reined in his horse, scanning the area with wary eyes. "Cooper should be waiting near the old Miller place," he said quietly. "It's just ahead that abandoned farm with the collapsed barn." Eleanor nodded, her face pale with fatigue and tension. Lily had woken as they descended into the valley and now sat silent and wide-eyed, sensing the adult's apprehension. They moved forward cautiously, staying within the shadow of the trees. The abandoned Miller farm came into view, a sad, dilapidated structure that had once been a thriving homestead before drought, and debt had driven the family away. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows of the collapsed barn. Cooper, his badge glinting in the last light of day. "You made it," he said in a low voice, relief evident in his tone. "I was beginning to worry." "The trail was slower going than expected," Silas replied, dismounting. "Any problems in town?" Cooper shook his head. "The search parties are all focused on the mountains. No one's expecting you to return to Silver Creek." His gaze shifted to Eleanor and Lily. "Ma'am, miss, how are you holding up?" "We're managing, Sheriff," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Thank you for your help." Cooper nodded, then turned back to Silas. "Victoria's expecting you. There's a back entrance to the Silver Spur through the livery stable. She's cleared out the upper floor, told the girls it was being renovated. You'll have the place to yourselves." "And she's agreed to help?" Eleanor asked, a note of doubt in her voice. Something flashed across Cooper's weathered face. Hesitation, perhaps, or discomfort. "She's interested in meeting you, Mrs. Whitman. Very interested." Eleanor and Silas exchanged a glance, both noting the sheriff's careful wording. "Let's get these horses squared away," Cooper continued, clearly eager to change the subject. "Can't take them into town too noticeable. I've arranged a place for them here. Old Miller's stable is still sound enough." As Cooper led their horses toward the ramshackle stable, Silas helped Eleanor and Lily dismount. Eleanor winced as her feet hit the ground, her broken ribs protesting the movement. "Are you all right?" Silas asked, his hand instinctively moving to support her elbow. Eleanor nodded, though her face was drawn with pain. "Just stiff from the ride." Silas wished he had his medical bag with him, something for the fresh bandages for her ribs. But they had traveled light, bringing only the essentials, another regret to add to his growing collection. Lily, despite the long journey, seemed to have found a second wind. She bounced on her toes, eyes bright with excitement at the new surroundings. "Is this where the princess lives?" she whispered to her mother, clearly remembering the story Eleanor had used to explain their journey. Eleanor smiled down at her daughter. "Not yet, little flower. We have a bit further to go." Cooper returned, having secured the horses in what remained of the stable. "We should move," he said quietly. "It's a half-mile to the edge of town, then another quarter-mile to the Silver Spur. We'll stick to the back alleys." They set off, Cooper leading the way, with Silas bringing up the rear, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. Eleanor walked between them, Lily's hand firmly in hers. The winter night closed around them, stars appearing one by one in the deep blue sky. Their breath formed clouds before their faces as they walked 4 sets of tracks marking their passage through the snow. As they approached the town proper, the buildings grew closer together, creating narrow alleys filled with shadows. Cooper led them through this maze with the confidence of a man who had patrolled these streets for years. Occasionally they would pause as voices or footsteps approached, pressing themselves into doorways or behind piles of crates until the danger passed. Lily, true to her promise, remained silent throughout, though her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Finally, Cooper raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Ahead, the back of a large building loomed, light spilling from its windows into the snow-covered alley. The sound of piano music and raucous laughter drifted through the night air. "The Silver Spur," Cooper murmured. "Victoria's place. The livery entrance is just there to the left." Silas surveyed the building with a critical eye. It was 3 stories tall, built of sturdy brick, with a wooden balcony running along the second floor, typical of the better class of saloons in mining towns. The third floor, which, according to Cooper, had been cleared for their use, showed no lights in its windows. "How do we get in without being seen?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the well-lit establishment dubiously. "Service entrance," Cooper replied, pointing to a narrow door set into the side of the building. "Leads directly to the back stairs. Victoria will be waiting." They approached cautiously, Cooper in the lead. He rapped softly on the door, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. A moment later, the door opened a crack, spilling golden light into the alley. A woman's face appeared in the gap, young, pretty, with wary eyes that assessed them quickly. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, then opened the door wider. "Quickly, inside." They slipped through the door one by one, finding themselves in a narrow hallway lit by a single oil lamp. The girl, barely more than 16, Silas guessed, locked the door behind them, then turned to face the group. "Miss Victoria's waiting upstairs," she said, her gaze lingering curiously on Lily. "Follow me and keep quiet. The main floor's busy tonight." She led them down the hall to a steep staircase that curved upward into darkness. As they climbed, the sounds of the saloon grew louder: piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses, snatches of conversation. But when they reached the second floor, the noise abruptly diminished, as if a door had been closed between them and the revelry below. The girl continued upward, leading them to the third floor, which was silent and dimly lit. Here she paused before a door at the end of the hallway and knocked softly. "They're here," she called. The door opened to reveal a tall woman of 35, dressed in a simple but elegant burgundy gown. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elaborate style, emphasizing high cheekbones and intelligent eyes that were a startling shade of blue, Edmund's eyes, Eleanor would later realize. There was a regal quality to her bearing, a confidence that spoke of power and the knowledge of how to use it. "Victoria," Cooper said with a nod, "as promised." Victoria Blackwood's gaze swept over the group, assessing each of them in turn. It lingered longest on Eleanor and Lily, a strange intensity in her expression that made Silas instinctively step closer to them. "Mrs. Whitman," Victoria said, her voice low and melodious, "and this must be Lily. Please come in." She stepped aside, allowing them to enter a surprisingly spacious sitting room. A fire burned in the hearth, casting warm light over comfortable furnishings that spoke of wealth and taste. Windows along one wall overlooked the main street of Silver Creek, though heavy curtains had been drawn across them. "Thank you for your help, Sheriff," Victoria said, clearly dismissing him. Cooper hesitated, glancing at Silas. "I should get back to my rounds before I'm missed." Silas nodded, understanding his friend's position. Cooper couldn't be seen spending too much time at the Silver Spur, not when his loyalty to the judge was already suspect. "I'll check in when I can," Cooper said, tipping his hat to Eleanor. "Be careful, all of you." After he had gone, Victoria closed the door and turned to face them. For a long moment she simply studied Eleanor, her expression unreadable. "You look like him," she finally said, her voice soft, with an emotion Silas couldn't identify. "Around the eyes and the chin." Eleanor frowned. "Like who?" Victoria's lips curved in a small, sad smile. "Edmund, your husband, my brother." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through all present. Eleanor staggered slightly, and Silas moved quickly to steady her. "That's not possible," Eleanor whispered. "Edmund never mentioned a sister. He was an only child. His parents died when he was young." "Did he tell you that?" Victoria asked, no challenge in her voice, only a weary acceptance. "Or did you assume—" Eleanor shook her head, confusion clear on her face. "He said his mother died in childbirth, his father in a mining accident when he was 12. There was never any mention of siblings." Victoria gestured to the seating area. "Please, sit. This is a long story and you've had a difficult journey." Silas helped Eleanor to a comfortable chair near the fire. Lily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, climbed into her mother's lap, watching Victoria with wide, curious eyes. Silas remained standing, positioned where he could see both the door and the windows. Victoria took a seat opposite Eleanor. "Edmund was telling the truth as he knew it," she began. "Our mother did die in childbirth, his birth. What he didn't know was that she had another child before him, me." "How is that possible?" Eleanor asked, still disbelieving. "Edmund would have known." "Not if I was sent away before he was old enough to remember," Victoria replied. "Our father, he couldn't bear to look at me after Mother died. I reminded him too much of her. So he sent me to live with relatives back east. I was only 5. She smoothed her skirts, a gesture Silas recognized as self-soothing. "When Edmund was born, our father kept him. Perhaps he thought a son would be different. Or perhaps he had simply learned to live with his grief by then." "If you were sent east, how did you end up back here?" Silas asked, breaking his silence for the first time since they'd entered the room. Victoria's eyes met his, shrewd and assessing. "The relatives I was sent to were not kind people, Mr. Morgan. I ran away at 16, made my way west working in saloons and gambling houses. I had a knack for cards, and an even better one for reading men's intentions." She turned back to Eleanor. "I never stopped looking for my family. I had a locket with my mother's picture, and I knew my father's name. When I finally tracked him down in Silver Creek, he was already dead. But I learned he had a son, Edmund, who had left town years before." "So you never actually met Edmund?" Eleanor asked, her voice softening slightly. Victoria shook her head, a shadow of regret crossing her face. "No. By the time I found Silver Creek, Judge Blackwood was already in control. He took an interest in me, offered me protection, and eventually adoption. I accepted, biding my time, gathering information, building my own small empire within his." Her gaze hardened. "I was working on a plan to find Edmund when news came that he had returned to the area with a wife and daughter." She leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. "I was going to reach out to him to reveal myself, but before I could, he discovered that silver vein on your property." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "And then the judge had him killed." Victoria nodded, pain etched in the lines around her mouth. "I didn't know of the judge's plans until it was too late. When I confronted him, he denied everything, of course. But I knew." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I've been waiting for a chance to bring him down ever since." "And we're that chance," Eleanor said, not a question, but a realization. "You the map, and what you know about Edmund's death, yes." Victoria's gaze moved to Lily, softening. "And I wanted to meet my niece." Lily, who had been listening to the adults with the patience of a child accustomed to being quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Are you really my aunt?" Victoria's composure cracked slightly at the innocent question. "Yes, little one, I'm your Aunt Victoria." Lily considered this seriously, then asked, "Did you know my daddy?" A flash of pain crossed Victoria's face. No, sweetheart. I never got the chance to meet him, but I've heard he was a good man. The best, Lily said with absolute conviction. Then, with the lightning-quick subject changes of childhood, your dress is pretty. It's the color of the berries Mama and I used to pick. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Thank you. Perhaps tomorrow you can tell me more about those berries and about your father, too. Silas, watching the exchange, found himself reassessing Victoria Blackwood. The calculation was still there in her eyes, the hardness of a woman who had survived difficult circumstances through wit and will. But there was also something else, a vulnerability when she looked at Lily, a genuine grief for the brother she had never known. Eleanor seemed to be making a similar assessment. If what you say is true, she said slowly, then we have a common cause. Justice for Edmund, safety for Lily. And the end of Judge Blackwood's reign over Silver Creek, Victoria added. Her gaze shifted to Silas. You've been very quiet, Mr. Morgan. What's your stake in all this? Before Silas could answer, Eleanor spoke. Silas saved our lives. He's risked everything to help us. Victoria studied him with newfound interest. The hermit doctor. Yes, Sheriff Cooper mentioned you. Said you were a gifted surgeon during the war. Silas stiffened. That was a long time ago. Not so long that your skills would be forgotten, Victoria countered. Silver Creek could use a good doctor. The one we have now is a drunk who can barely set a broken bone. I didn't come here to set up practice, Silas said flatly. I came to ensure Eleanor and Lily's safety. Victoria inclined her head, accepting his response for now. Of course. Speaking of which, you must all be exhausted. I've prepared rooms for you through there. She gestured to a door on the far side of the sitting room. There's hot water for washing clean clothes and food if you're hungry. Eleanor rose, still supporting Lily, who was now nearly asleep despite the dramatic revelations. Thank you. It's been a long day. Tomorrow we'll talk strategy, Victoria said. How to use the map, what evidence we have against the judge who might be willing to testify. Silas, who had been surveying the room's exits and potential weaknesses, turned his attention back to their hostess. These secret rooms of yours, how secure are they? Very, Victoria replied. The judge had this building constructed 10 years ago, designed to his specifications. What he doesn't know is that I modified those specifications to include hidden passages and rooms unknown even to him. A hint of pride colored her voice. No one enters this floor without my knowledge. And your staff, Silas pressed. The girl who let us in, Jenny, is loyal to me, not the judge. As are all my girls. They know what kind of man he is. Victoria's expression hardened briefly. Some of them have first-hand experience of his proclivities. The implication hung in the air, adding another layer to the judge's crimes. Eleanor instinctively tightened her hold on Lily, who was now fully asleep against her shoulder. Let me show you to your rooms, Victoria said, rising. We can continue this discussion tomorrow when you've rested. She led them through the door into a short hallway with 3 doors leading off it. Mrs. Whitman and Lily here, she indicated the first door. Mr. Morgan, you'll be comfortable in this one. The third is my private office. Feel free to knock if you need anything. Eleanor paused at the threshold of her assigned room. Victoria, thank you for helping us and for telling me about Edmund. He would have wanted to know he had a sister. Victoria's carefully maintained composure wavered for a moment. I like to think so, she said softly. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, little niece. The last was whispered to Lily's sleeping form. When Eleanor had disappeared into her room, Victoria turned to Silas, her expression sharpening once more into the calculating woman he had first met. "A word, Mr. Morgan, in my office." Silas hesitated, glancing at Eleanor's closed door. "It's been a long day." "This won't take long," Victoria assured him, already moving toward the third door. "And I think you'll find it relevant to your patient's welfare." Reluctantly, Silas followed her into a small but elegant office dominated by a large desk covered with ledgers and papers. Victoria closed the door behind them and moved to a cabinet against the wall. From it she removed a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Drink," she offered. Silas shook his head. "I prefer to keep a clear head." Victoria poured herself a measure anyway. "Admirable, and consistent with what Cooper told me about you." She took a sip, regarding him over the rim of her glass. "He says you're a Victoria poured herself a measure anyway. Admirable, and consistent with what Cooper told me about you." She took a sip, regarding him over the rim of her glass. "He says you're a man of principle, that you keep your word." "Cooper talks too much," Silas replied. "What is it you want, Miss Blackwood? Victoria, please." She set down her glass and leaned against her desk, studying him with shrewd eyes. "What I want, Mr. Morgan, is to be sure of your intentions toward my sister-in-law and niece." Silas stiffened. "My intentions are to see them safe." "And after that," Victoria pressed, "when the judge is dealt with and they no longer need your protection, will you return to your hermitage, leave them to fend for themselves?" The question hit uncomfortably close to thoughts Silas had been avoiding. "That's not your concern." "I disagree. Edmund's family is my concern." Victoria's voice was cool, clinical. "I see the way you look at them, the way the child looks at you. Attachments are forming, Mr. Morgan. I simply want to know if you're the kind of man who honors such attachments or one who runs from them." Anger flared in Silas's chest. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," Victoria countered. "I know you were a surgeon who couldn't save his wife and unborn child from influenza. I know you've spent a decade punishing yourself for that failure by refusing to practice medicine. I know you care for Eleanor and Lily more than you want to admit even to yourself." Silas's blood ran cold. "How do you know about my wife?" Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Cooper, he's worried about you, you know. Says you've been alone too long." "Cooper had no right." "He had every right," Victoria interrupted. "He's your friend, and he cares what happens to you, as do I now that our fates are intertwined." Silas turned away, struggling to contain the emotions her words had stirred. "You've made your point. Is that all?" Victoria sighed. "Not quite." She moved to her desk and opened a drawer, removing a folded document. "This arrived yesterday from Carson City. It's a wanted poster for Eleanor Whitman, issued at the judge's request." She handed it to Silas, who unfolded it with dread. There, in stark black print, was Eleanor's name and a rough sketch of her face. The charge murder of her husband, Edmund Whitman. "This is absurd," Silas growled. "She didn't kill Edmund." "Of course not," Victoria agreed. "But this is how the judge operates. He controls the law in Silver Creek, and he's using it to ensure that if Eleanor is found, she'll be arrested immediately with no chance to tell her story." Silas refolded the poster, his jaw tight with anger. "Does she know about this?" Victoria shook her head. "I thought it best to tell you first. She has enough to worry about." "She has a right to know." "And she will tomorrow when we discuss our strategy. Tonight she needs rest." Victoria retrieved her glass, taking another sip. "There's something else you should know, Mr. Morgan. Something about the judge's search parties." Silas looked up sharply. "What about them?" They found your cabin this afternoon. The news hit Silas like a physical blow. His home, his sanctuary for 10 years now violated by the judge's men. They tore it apart looking for clues to your whereabouts, Victoria continued. When they found nothing, they burned it to the ground. Silas closed his eyes, a wave of grief washing over him, not just for the physical structure, but for what it represented the life he had built, the solitude he had chosen, the penance he had assigned himself. All gone, reduced to ash. When he opened his eyes again, Victoria was watching him with something like sympathy. "I'm sorry. I know what it's like to lose a home." "It was just a cabin," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion he refused to acknowledge. "What matters is that they didn't find us." Victoria nodded, accepting his stoicism. "True, but it does mean there's no going back, Mr. Morgan. Not for any of us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. No going back. Only forward into an uncertain future where the judge's reach extended far beyond Silver Creek. "You should rest," Victoria said, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow will be a demanding day." Silas nodded, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. "The girl who let us in, Jenny, can she be trusted completely? With her life?" Victoria replied without hesitation. "She's my half-sister." Silas's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Another secret, Whitman." Victoria's lips curved in a mirthless smile. "No, different father. Same circumstance, the judge's cruelty. Her mother was one of his diversions. When she died, I took Jenny in. The judge doesn't know our connection." "You collect strays," Silas observed. "I protect my own," Victoria corrected. "As do you, it seems." Silas didn't respond to that. "Good night, Miss Blackwood." "Victoria," she reminded him. "We're allies now, Mr. Morgan, perhaps eventually friends." "Silas," he conceded, before stepping out and closing the door behind him. In the hallway, Silas paused, the events of the day crashing over him in a wave of exhaustion. His cabin burned. Eleanor branded a murderer. Victoria Blackwood revealed as Edmund's sister. The complexity of their situation seemed to multiply with each passing hour. But beneath the exhaustion and worry, another emotion stirred, a fierce determination he had not felt since the war. The judge had taken too much already, Edmund's life. Eleanor's security, his own home. He would not be allowed to take anything more. With that resolve firming his steps, Silas entered his assigned room, closing the door on a day that had changed everything, and preparing for a tomorrow that promised to change even more. The sitting room had been transformed in the morning. The comfortable seating arrangement had been pushed aside to make room for a large table, now covered with maps, documents, and what appeared to be architectural drawings of several buildings in Silver Creek. Victoria stood at the head of the table, deep in conversation with Cooper, who had arrived while Silas and Eleanor were preparing for the day. They looked up as Silas entered, followed by Eleanor and a sleepy-eyed Lily. "Good, you're all here," Victoria said. "We can begin." She gestured to a young woman hovering near the sideboard. "Jenny, would you take Lily to have some breakfast? Perhaps show her the secret playroom." Jenny smiled, extending a hand to Lily. "Would you like that, Miss Lily? We have dolls and books, and Cook made cinnamon rolls this morning." Lily looked to her mother for permission. Eleanor nodded, kneeling to her daughter's level. "Go with Miss Jenny, little flower. I'll come get you after our grown-up talk." "Is it about the bad men?" Lily asked, her perception sharper than her years would suggest. Eleanor smoothed a hand over her daughter's golden curls. "Yes, but don't worry. We're all working together to keep you safe." Lily considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, but Mr. Silas has to promise to be here when I get back." Silas, taken aback by the child's direct request, found himself nodding. "I promise." Satisfied, Lily took Jenny's hand and allowed herself to be led from the room. As the door closed behind them, Victoria turned to the adults with a grave expression. "The situation has become more complicated," she began, without preamble. "The judge's return was unexpected. According to my sources, he was supposed to be in Carson City for another week, meeting with territorial officials." "Something must have drawn him back," Cooper said, his weathered face lined with worry. "And I'm betting it has to do with the Whitman mine." Victoria nodded. "My thoughts exactly. Which is why we need to move quickly." She gestured to the documents spread across the table. "I've been gathering evidence against the judge for years. Financial records showing bribes paid to territorial officials, testimonies from women he's abused, documentation of claim jumping and fraudulent property seizures." "Is it enough?" Eleanor asked, scanning the papers with a critical eye. Victoria grimaced. "Alone, no. The judge has too many powerful friends, too many officials in his pocket. We need something more concrete." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor's waist, where Edmund's belt was hidden beneath her clothing. "We need the map." Eleanor's hand moved protectively to her waist. "Even if we have the map, how does that prove the judge killed Edmund?" "It doesn't," Cooper interjected, "but it establishes motive. Combined with Victoria's evidence and other testimony, it might be enough to convince a federal marshal to investigate." "Other testimony?" Silas asked, noting the careful pause in Cooper's words. Cooper and Victoria exchanged a glance. "There was a witness to Edmund's death," Cooper said finally. "Someone who saw it wasn't an accident." Eleanor gasped. "What? Who?" "One of the miners who worked Edmund's claim," Victoria replied. "A man named Caleb Tucker. He saw the judge's men tamper with the support beams in the main shaft the day Edmund died." "And he never came forward?" Eleanor demanded, anger flashing in her eyes. Cooper shook his head. "The judge paid him to keep quiet, gave him a job as a foreman at one of the larger mines, a house in town security for his family." "But he talked to you," Silas observed. "He's dying," Victoria said bluntly. "Consumption. He doesn't want to meet his maker with Edmund's blood on his conscience." Eleanor sank into a chair, the implications washing over her. "So we have a witness, the map, Victoria's evidence. Is that enough?" "For a federal investigation, yes," Cooper said. "But getting that evidence to the right people is the challenge. The judge controls the telegraph office, the mail, the stagecoach. Nothing leaves Silver Creek without his knowledge. Which is why today's town meeting may be our best opportunity," Victoria added. "The judge has called a town meeting for noon. He rarely addresses the town directly, unless it's something significant." "What town meeting?" Eleanor asked. "News just came this morning," Cooper explained. "The judge posted notices an hour ago. The whole town's required to attend. I'm guessing he's going to announce something about the mine." Silas frowned, not liking where this was heading. "You want to expose him in front of the whole town? That's too dangerous." "Not the whole plan," Victoria clarified. "Just enough to create confusion and doubt, to buy us time while Cooper takes the full evidence packet to the federal marshal in Laramie." "And who will be doing this public confrontation?" Silas asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Victoria's gaze shifted to Eleanor. The grieving widow returned from the dead to demand justice for her murdered husband. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Me, but there's a warrant for my arrest." the moment I show my face in town." "That's part of the plan," Victoria interrupted. "Your appearance will create a sensation. The judge will be caught off guard, forced to react without preparation. In that moment of confusion, while all eyes are on you, and the Judge Cooper will slip away with the evidence." Silas shook his head. "It's too risky. If something goes wrong, Eleanor could be arrested or worse." "I'll be there," Victoria assured him. "As the judge's daughter, I have certain protections. I can claim I've been sheltering Eleanor out of family loyalty to Edmund, that I only just learned of her supposed crimes." "And me?" Silas asked. "What's my role in this plan?" Victoria and Cooper exchanged another of those meaningful glances that Silas was beginning to find irritating. "You'll be our backup," Cooper said. "Stationed at the rear of the crowd, armed, ready to create a diversion if things go south." He hesitated. "And you'll be responsible for getting Lily to safety if the worst happens." The weight of that responsibility settled on Silas's shoulders like a physical burden. Lily, the child who had made him promise to be there when she returned, who had given him a pine cone to carry as a talisman, who looked at him with trust he had done nothing to earn. "There has to be another way," he insisted, "one that doesn't put Eleanor at such risk." "If you have an alternative, I'm listening," Victoria said, her tone not unkind, but pragmatic. "But the judge's return has forced our hand. If he announces at the town meeting that the silver vein has been located, we lose our leverage." Eleanor, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke. "I'll do it." All eyes turned to her. "I'll confront him," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "For Edmund, for Lily, for every person he's hurt or killed in his quest for power." Silas moved to her side. "Eleanor, think about this. If something goes wrong, then you'll get Lily to safety," Eleanor said, meeting his eyes with calm resolve. "I trust you to do that, Silas, as I trust Victoria and Cooper to do their parts." The simple declaration of trust struck Silas like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had trusted him so completely? Not since Sarah, certainly. Not since the war, when men had placed their broken bodies in his hands with faith that he would save them. He had failed so many of them. Failed Sarah. Failed their unborn child. Could he bear the weight of Eleanor and Lily's trust, knowing he might fail them too? As if sensing his internal struggle, Eleanor reached out and took his hand. "You won't fail Silas," she said softly, seeming to read his thoughts. "I know you won't." Victoria cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Then it's decided. Eleanor will confront the judge at the town meeting. Cooper will transport the evidence to Laramie. Silas will provide backup and emergency extraction for Lily if needed." "And you?" Cooper asked. Victoria's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be playing the role I was born for, the dutiful daughter with secrets of her own." She turned to Eleanor. "Now, let's see this map. If we're going to use it as leverage, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before untying the belt from around her waist. It was a man's belt, well-worn leather, with intricate tooling along its length. To casual observation, the tooling appeared decorative abstract patterns and flourishes common in leather work throughout the West. But as Eleanor spread it flat on the table, Silas could see what she had described. Hidden within the decorative elements were subtle markings that, when viewed with the right knowledge, formed a detailed map of the surrounding mountains and valleys. "Edmund marked the main vein here," Eleanor said, pointing to a particular swirl in the pattern. "But there are actually 3 veins in total, the main one, which is the richest, and 2 smaller ones here and here." Victoria leaned in, studying the markings with keen interest. "Ingenious," she murmured. Edmund always was clever with his hands. A shadow of regret passed across her face. "Another thing I never got to tell him." Cooper examined the map with a more practical eye. "This main vein runs directly under the judge's property line." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "That's why Edmund was so secretive about the claim. He knew the judge would try to say the silver belonged to him. And that's why the judge had him killed," Victoria added grimly. "Not just for the silver itself, but because Edmund had proof the main vein was on his land, not the judge's." Silas, who had been studying the map with the others, suddenly straightened. "The town meeting is about boundary lines." The others looked at him in confusion. "Think about it," he continued. "The judge returns unexpectedly, calls a town meeting immediately. The search parties were recalled from the mountains. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. He's found the vein." "Or thinks he has," Silas amended. "But without the map, he can't be sure of the boundaries. So he's going to announce a correction to the property lines. Make it official that the silver is on his land, not the Whitman claim." "Can he do that?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. Cooper's expression darkened. "As county judge, with no one to oversee him." "Yes, he can discover errors in the original surveys, declare new boundaries. It's been done before." "Then we have even less time than we thought," Victoria said. "The town meeting is in 2 hours. Cooper, you need to get the evidence packet prepared and be ready to move the moment the confrontation begins." Cooper nodded, gathering several documents from the table. "I'll have my horse saddled and waiting behind the livery. Once the distraction starts, I'll be on my way to Laramie." "How long will it take you to reach the federal marshal?" Silas asked. 2 days, maybe 3, with the snow," Cooper replied. "Depends on the conditions in the mountain passes." "And how long before the marshal can return with you?" Eleanor pressed. Cooper's expression was grim. "Another 2 days at least. Possibly longer if he needs to gather a proper force." "So nearly a week before official help arrives," Victoria summarized. "We'll need to be prepared to protect ourselves in the meantime. The judge won't take this challenge lying down." Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, fear flickering across her face before being replaced by determination. "Then we'd better make the confrontation count. Make it public enough, scandalous enough, that the judge can't simply make us disappear afterward." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Exactly. The court of public opinion can be a powerful restraint, even on a man like the judge." She gathered up the belt, handing it back to Eleanor. "Keep this safe. It's our key piece of evidence." As Eleanor secured the belt once more around her waist, Silas found himself calculating risks, escape routes, contingency plans. The physician in him, trained to anticipate complications and prepare for the worst, could see a dozen ways this plan could go wrong. But the man in him, the part that had been awakened by Eleanor's trust and Lily's innocent faith, saw something else: a chance to right a terrible wrong, a chance to protect those who needed protection, a chance to be the man he had once been before grief and guilt had driven him into isolation. "I need to check on Lily," Eleanor said, breaking into his thoughts. "Make sure she's all right." Victoria nodded. "Of course. Jenny will have taken her to the playroom on the 2nd floor. It's hidden behind a false wall in what appears to be a storage room." After Eleanor had left, Victoria turned to Silas, her expression serious. "You don't fully approve of the plan." It wasn't a question. Silas saw no point in denying it. "I think it puts Eleanor at unnecessary risk." "All courage involves risk," Victoria countered. "And Eleanor has more courage than most men I've known." "Courage isn't the issue," Silas said. "Planning is. We're rushing into this with too many unknowns, too many variables we can't control. Victoria sighed, some of her composure slipping to reveal the worry beneath. You're right, of course. In an ideal world, we'd have weeks to prepare to anticipate every contingency. But we don't have that luxury. The judge has forced our hand. And if it goes wrong, Silas pressed. If Eleanor is arrested, if the judge's men prevent Cooper from reaching Laramie, then we improvise, Victoria said simply. As we've all been doing since the moment Eleanor arrived at your cabin door. The straightforward answer, delivered without pretense or false confidence, actually reassured Silas more than any elaborate contingency plan might have. Victoria Blackwood was a survivor accustomed to adapting to changing circumstances. If anyone could navigate the treacherous waters ahead, it was she. I should check my revolver, Silas said, accepting the reality of their situation. Make sure it's in working order. Victoria nodded, understanding the concession for what it was. Cooper can provide additional ammunition if needed. As Silas turned to leave, Victoria called after him. Dr. Morgan. He paused, noting the formal title. Yes? Victoria's eyes were steady on his. For what it's worth, I believe we're doing the right thing. The necessary thing. For Edmund. For Silver Creek. And for that little girl who looks at you like you hang the moon. Silas didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and left the room. His mind filled with preparations for the confrontation to come, and the weight of Lily's trust heavy on his shoulders. But as he climbed the stairs to retrieve his revolver, he found himself touching the pine cone in his pocket, once more drawing unexpected comfort from its presence. Perhaps Victoria was right. Perhaps this was the necessary thing, the right thing regardless of the risks. Perhaps after 10 years of running from life, it was time to stand and fight. The town square of Silver Creek hummed with anticipation as noon approached. Townsfolk gathered beneath the crisp winter sky, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The weekly market had been cleared away, leaving the open space before the courthouse steps empty, a stage set for whatever pronouncement Judge Harlan Blackwood deemed important enough to summon the entire town. From his position at the edge of the crowd, Silas Morgan watched the collar of his coat turned up against both the cold and the possibility of recognition. The revolver he carried rested in his pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. Across the square, Victoria Blackwood moved among the town's elite, with practiced grace. Eleanor remained hidden in the alley beside the mercantile waiting for her cue. Lily was safely hidden in the Silver Spur, with Jenny in a secret room behind a false wall that Victoria had assured them was unknown even to the judge. A stir ran through the crowd as the courthouse doors swung open. Judge Harlan Blackwood emerged, flanked by 2 deputies. Silas studied the man who had caused so much suffering with cold, clinical detachment. The judge was tall, broad-shouldered, despite his 65 years, with silver hair and a meticulously groomed beard. He wore a black suit of expensive cut, a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. But it was his eyes that held Silas's attention, pale blue and utterly without warmth, like ice over deep water. The judge stepped to the edge of the courthouse steps, raising his hands for silence. "Citizens of Silver Creek," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the square. "I've called you here today to address certain matters vital to the future prosperity of our town. As you know, the territorial surveyors who mapped our region some 15 years ago were not always precise in their measurements. Errors were made, boundaries misplaced." A murmur ran through the crowd. Property boundaries were the foundation of wealth and security in a mining town. Any change could have profound implications. Recent examinations have revealed that several such errors exist in the northeastern section of our township, the judge declared, specifically in the area of the old Whitman claim. As county judge, it is my duty to correct these errors. Blackwood continued, producing an official-looking document. I have here revised boundary markers that will be recorded in the Territorial Land Office effective immediately. Silas could see Victoria beginning to move toward the steps where her adoptive father stood. Cooper, too, was edging closer to his horse, ready for the moment of distraction. These corrections will ensure that all mineral rights are properly assigned according to legal ownership, the judge said, the hint of a smile playing at the edges of his mouth. The future of Silver Creek depends on the orderly development of our resources. It was as transparent as it was brazen, a legal fiction to steal Edmund Whitman's discovery. The judge was unfolding his revised map when Victoria reached the base of the steps. "Father," she called, "before these new boundaries are recorded, shouldn't we address the other matter?" The Whitman woman. A flash of annoyance crossed the judge's face. "Now is hardly the time, Victoria." "On the contrary," Victoria persisted. "If Eleanor Whitman murdered her husband as you claim, then her ownership of the claim is void, regardless of boundary corrections. The town should know the full situation." The judge nodded, seeing an opportunity to reinforce his narrative. "Very well. For those who haven't heard, Eleanor Whitman, widow of Edmund Whitman, is wanted for her husband's murder. Evidence suggests she tampered with support beams in his mine, causing the collapse that killed him." Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. "She fled justice with her young daughter," the judge continued, "taking with her certain documents pertaining to the mine. My men continue to search for her, though I fear the recent blizzard may have claimed her life. A tragic end, but perhaps fitting for one who— Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" Judge Blackwood, the voice, clear, steady, and unmistakably female, cut through the square like a knife. The crowd parted as Eleanor Whitman stood at the edge of the square, her chin high, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Eleanor Whitman," the judge said after a moment of shocked silence, "I'm surprised to see you alive, and bold enough to show your face in Silver Creek." "Bold enough to face a liar and a murderer," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying across the now silent square. "Bold enough to tell this town the truth about Edmund Whitman's death." She began walking forward, the crowd instinctively giving way. From the corner of his eye, Silas saw Cooper casually mounting his horse, drawing no attention in the drama unfolding. "You stand there," Eleanor continued, pointing at the judge, "preparing to steal my husband's discovery through falsified boundaries. Just as you stole his life when he refused to sell you his claim." The judge's face darkened. "These are the ravings of a murderess, nothing more. Deputies, arrest this woman." The two deputies hesitated clearly, uncertain about seizing a woman in front of the entire town. Victoria intervened. "Wait," she called. "Let her speak. The people of Silver Creek deserve to hear both sides before judgment is passed." The judge shot his adoptive daughter a look of cold fury, but he was trapped by the public nature of the confrontation. "Speak, then," he said with deceptive mildness. "Tell us your fantastical tale." Eleanor had reached the center of the square, now all eyes upon her. "My husband discovered silver on our property last autumn. Not just any silver, a vein rich enough to make Silver Creek prosperous for decades to come." She turned slowly, addressing the crowd. "Edmund went to file the claim legally, as was his right. But the judge here had other ideas. He wanted the silver for himself. When Edmund refused to sell, the judge's men sabotaged the mine supports, causing the collapse that killed my husband." "And your proof?" the judge asked, contempt dripping from his voice. "A witness," Eleanor said. Caleb Tucker saw your men tampering with the supports the day Edmund died. A stir ran through the crowd. Caleb Tucker was known to most in town, a respected foreman who had suddenly come into good fortune the previous year. More fantasy, the judge scoffed, though Silas noticed a tightening around his eyes. Tucker works for me. He would have reported such a thing. Would he? When you bought his silence with a foreman's position and a house for his family. But Caleb Tucker is dying. Judge. Consumption. And he doesn't want to meet his maker with Edmund's blood on his conscience. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Silas glanced toward the livery, relieved to see that Cooper had disappeared. The sheriff was on his way to Laramie with the evidence. Enough of this, the judge snapped. Deputies, arrest her now and find Caleb Tucker. From the edge of the crowd, a raspy voice spoke. Mrs. Whitman is telling the truth. All heads turned to see Caleb Tucker leaning heavily on a cane, his face gaunt from consumption. I saw them, Tucker continued. The judge's men. They tampered with the supports in the main shaft the day Edmund Whitman died. I was paid to keep quiet. He coughed a wet, rattling sound. But I can't take the secret to my grave. The judge's face went white with fury. This is a conspiracy, he snarled. Lies, all of it. If they're lies, Eleanor called, reaching for the belt around her waist. Then how do I have this? She held up Edmund's belt. My husband's map, showing the silver vein, runs beneath our property, not yours. The map you've been searching for, the one you tortured me to find. Enough, the judge roared. Arrest them all, now. The deputies and the judge's men surged forward. Victoria and Eleanor stood their ground. Tucker beside them despite his weakness. Silas drew his revolver and stepped into the open. Stop, he commanded. The next man who moves toward these people will be shot. The judge's pale eyes found Silas. The hermit doctor. So you're part of this too. I'm part of justice, Silas replied. Something this town has lacked for too long. For a moment, it seemed the impasse would hold until a child's scream turned Silas's blood to ice, Lily's scream. Mama! Eleanor's head whipped toward the sound. Lily! Through the crowd came Jenny, struggling in the grip of one of the judge's men. Behind them, another man carried a kicking, screaming Lily. Quite a performance, Mrs. Whitman, the judge called, his confidence returning. But it seems I hold the stronger hand. The man carrying Lily brought her to the courthouse steps. The child's eyes were wide with terror. Mr. Silas, she cried, help me. Something deep and primal rose in Silas's chest, a protective fury he hadn't felt since the war. Let her go, he said, his voice deadly quiet. She's an innocent child. A bargaining chip, the judge corrected. Put down your weapon, doctor. And you, Mrs. Whitman, if you value your daughter's life, you'll retract your accusations. Publicly. Eleanor had gone very still, her eyes fixed on her daughter. If I do, she said carefully, you'll release her unharmed. You have my word, the judge replied. The lie was transparent. Don't trust him, Eleanor, Victoria warned. He'll kill you all once he has what he wants. Eleanor, Silas called, not taking his eyes off the man holding Lily. Trust me. She turned to him, uncertainty in her gaze. Do you remember what I promised Lily? He asked. About her finger. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. She remembered the pinky promise Silas had made to her daughter, vowing to protect her. Yes, she said, her voice steadying. I remember. Then trust me now, Silas said. Eleanor took a deep breath, then turned back to the judge. I won't retract the truth, she declared. not even for my daughter's safety, because I know you'll kill us regardless." The judge's face darkened. "A poor choice, Mrs. Whitman. A very poor choice indeed." He nodded to the man holding Lily. "Take the child to my carriage. The rest." Silas dropped to one knee and fired. Not at the judge or his men, but at the ice-laden branch of the pine tree overhanging the courthouse steps. The crack of the gunshot was followed by the sharper crack of breaking wood. The massive branch, weakened by ice, gave way directly above where the judge and his men stood with Lily. The judge dove for cover. His men scattering, Lily dropped unceremoniously as her captor leapt to safety. Silas was moving before the branch hit the ground, holstering his revolver and sprinting toward Lily. He reached her just as she was scrambling to her feet, scooping her into his arms and turning to run. "This way," Victoria called, already pulling Eleanor toward a side street. "To the Silver Spur." Silas followed Lily, clutched tight against his chest. Behind them, the judge's furious shouts rose above the confusion. "Find them! Find them, now!" They fled through narrow alleys and service passages, Victoria leading the way. Twice they had to duck into doorways to avoid search parties. Lily, understanding the danger, remained perfectly silent in Silas's arms. They were halfway across the lumber yard when a shout went up from the road. "There they are!" 3 of the judge's men emerged, cutting off their path. Silas pushed Lily toward Eleanor, drawing his revolver once more. "Get them behind cover," he instructed Victoria, who immediately led Eleanor and Lily toward a large stack of timber. The armed man called, "Just hand over the woman and the brat Doc. Judge says you can ride out, no questions asked. He just wants what's his." "Nothing here belongs to the judge," Silas replied, "especially not Eleanor and her daughter." The man shrugged and raised his pistol. Silas fired first, his aim true. The man dropped with a cry, clutching his shoulder. His companions hesitated. "Next one's in the chest," Silas warned. "Walk away, now!" The remaining men backed away, dragging their wounded companion. "That bought us minutes at most," Victoria said grimly. "They'll be back with more men." "We need the horses," Silas said. "It's our only chance of outrunning them." Victoria nodded. "I know a back way to the Miller place, through the old creek bed." As they hurried along, Victoria said, "The judge won't give up, not now. We've humiliated him publicly, challenged his authority. He'll hunt us to the ends of the earth." "He has to find us first," Eleanor replied, "and Cooper will be bringing help." "In 4 or 5 days," Victoria reminded her. "We need to survive until then." Silas, leading the way away with his revolver ready, had an idea. "The Shoshone. There's a Shoshone camp in the valley beyond Grey Wolf Pass. I've treated their sick over the years. They might shelter us, especially a mother and child." When they reached the old Miller place, they found their horses where Cooper had hidden them. As they mounted up, Victoria called from outside, "Riders coming! We need to move!" As they rode away, Silas cast one final glance back at the town. It looked peaceful, picturesque, belying the corruption at its heart. He turned his horse north, following Eleanor and Victoria into the forest, leaving Silver Creek behind. The hunter's cabin was little more than a one-room shack tucked into the lee of a rocky outcropping. Silas built a fire in the small stone hearth, while Victoria attended to the horses, and Eleanor tried to settle Lily, who had grown increasingly distressed. "It's okay, little flower," Eleanor murmured, rocking her daughter. "We're safe now." "But the bad men will come," Lily whispered, her face tear-streaked. "They hurt Miss Jenny. They'll hurt you too." Silas knelt beside the chair, bringing himself to Lily's level. "Remember the pine cone you gave me? he asked, producing it from his pocket. Lily nodded, hiccuping slightly. Do you know why pine cones are special? Silas continued. They protect the seeds inside them. Even when there's fire or snow or strong winds, the pine cone keeps those seeds safe. And when the danger is past, the seeds can grow into new trees. We're like the seeds, Lily asked. Silas smiled gently. Yes, and your mother and Victoria and I, we're like the pine cone. We'll keep you safe until the danger is past. Promise? Lily asked, extending her small pinky finger. Silas linked his much larger finger with hers. I promise. The solemn ritual comforted Lily, and she soon fell asleep in her mother's arms. That was beautiful, Eleanor said softly, about the pine cone. Just the truth, Silas replied, rising to his feet. We should take shifts standing watch. I'll go first. I'll take second, Victoria said, entering the cabin with an armful of firewood. You both need rest more than I do. Silas nodded, moving to the window to scan the surrounding forest. No sign of pursuit yet, but he knew it wouldn't be long. The judge would have men combing every trail, every possible hiding place. What happened to Jenny? He asked Victoria quietly. Victoria's expression darkened. I don't know. One of the judge's men must have followed her when she took Lily back to the Silver Spur. I thought the secret room was safe, but... She shook her head. I should have been more careful. It's not your fault, Eleanor said from across the room. The judge has eyes everywhere. We knew the risks. Victoria looked unconvinced, but she nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll head for the Shoshone camp. It's another day's ride from here. Eleanor settled on a pallet near the fire with Lily, while Victoria stretched out on a worn bedroll in the corner. Silas remained by the window, revolver in hand, his eyes scanning the moonlit forest beyond. As the night deepened, the sounds of the wilderness replaced the chaos of their escape. Wolves howled in the distance, an owl called from a nearby tree. The wind whispered through the pines. Silas found himself touching the pine cone in his pocket, thinking of the promise he had made to Lily. A promise to keep her safe. A promise he intended to keep whatever the cost. His thoughts turned to Cooper, riding hard for Laramie with the evidence that could bring the judge to justice. He hoped his old friend had made it through safely, that he hadn't been intercepted by the judge's men. So much depended on Cooper now. Their lives, their futures. Justice for Edmund Whitman. The hours passed slowly. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows across the sleeping forms of Eleanor, Lily, and Victoria. Silas added a log, careful not to make too much noise. As he returned to his post by the window, he caught Eleanor watching him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. You should be sleeping, he said softly. I can't, she replied. Too much on my mind. Almus nodded understanding. It was brave what you did today, standing up to the judge in front of the whole town. It was foolish, Eleanor countered. I put Lily at risk. The judge was always a risk to Lily, Silas said. At least now the town knows what he is, what he's done. That will make it harder for him to act openly against you. Eleanor was silent for a moment. Do you think Cooper made it through? Cooper's smart, resourceful. He knows the terrain better than most of the judge's men. Silas tried to sound more confident than he felt. He'll make it. And if he doesn't, Silas met her gaze steadily. Then we find another way. We keep moving, keep fighting until the judge is brought to justice. Eleanor studied him in the dim light. You've changed, Silas Morgan. The man I met in that cabin during the blizzard wouldn't have said that. That man was hiding, Silas admitted. From the world, from himself, from everything that mattered. And now, Silas looked toward Lily, sleeping peacefully despite all that had happened. Now I have something worth fighting for again. Eleanor's expression softened. She opened her mouth to speak, but a sound outside froze them both. A twig snapping, the muffled whicker of a horse. Silas raised a finger to his lips, then moved silently to Victoria's side, shaking her awake. Her eyes opened immediately, alert. "Someone's outside," he whispered. Victoria rose without a sound, reaching for her rifle. Eleanor gathered the still sleeping Lily in her arms, ready to move at a moment's notice. Silas peered cautiously through the window. In the pale moonlight, he could make out shapes moving among the trees. Men on horseback, moving slowly, methodically, searching the area. The judge's men had found them. "Back door," Victoria whispered, pointing to a narrow door at the rear of the cabin. "It leads to a deer trail through the ravine. If we're quick and quiet, we might slip past them." Silas nodded. "I'll create a diversion. Draw them away from your escape route." "No," Eleanor hissed. "They'll kill you." "Better one than all," Silas replied. "Get Lily to safety. That's what matters." Victoria's hand closed around his arm. "There's another way. The cabin has a root cellar. Small, but enough to hide in while they search. They won't expect anyone to still be here." Silas hesitated, weighing their options. Running meant exposure in the open, where the judge's men could easily spot them. Hiding was risky too, but if they could remain undetected until the search moved on. "The cellar," he decided. "Quick, before they surround us completely." Victoria led them to a trapdoor hidden beneath a worn rug. She lifted it silently, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. "Down quickly," she urged. "I'll cover our tracks." Eleanor went first, still carrying the sleeping Lily. Then Victoria. Silas followed last, pulling the trapdoor closed above him. The cellar was tiny, barely large enough for the four of them. They huddled together in the darkness, scarcely daring to breathe as footsteps approached the cabin. The door crashed open above them. Heavy boots moved across the floor directly over their heads. Voices called to each other, rough, angry voices. "Search everything," a man ordered. "They can't have gone far." Lily stirred in Eleanor's arms, her eyes fluttering open. Before she could make a sound, Eleanor pressed a gentle hand over her mouth, meeting her daughter's frightened gaze with a reassuring look. Silas tensed his hand on his revolver. If they were discovered, he would go down fighting. Give Eleanor and Lily a chance to escape in the confusion. The search continued, overhead drawers being opened and closed, furniture being moved. Something shattered a lamp or a dish. More footsteps, more voices. Then a new sound. Liquid splashing on wood. The sharp smell of kerosene seeping through the floorboards. Victoria's eyes widened in the darkness. They were going to burn the cabin. Silas reached for the trapdoor, ready to burst out shooting. Victoria grabbed his arm, shaking her head vehemently. "Too many," her eyes said. "We'll be cut down before we clear the door." The strike of a match. The whoosh of flames catching. The footsteps retreating. "Let it burn," the same voice ordered. "If they're hiding nearby, the fire will smoke them out. If not, at least they'll have one less place to hole up." The door closed. The footsteps receded, but above them the crackling of flames grew louder. "We have to move," Silas whispered urgently. "Now, before the fire takes hold completely." Victoria nodded, reaching for the trap door. It wouldn't budge. Something heavy had fallen or been placed on top of it. "It's blocked," she hissed. Smoke began to seep through the cracks in the floorboards. Lily whimpered, burying her face in her mother's neck. Silas threw his shoulder against the trap door once, twice. It lifted slightly, but wouldn't open fully. The heat above was intensifying rapidly. "There has to be another way out," Eleanor said, desperation in her voice. Victoria was feeling along the earthen walls. "Root cellars sometimes have exterior access, a hatch for bringing in vegetables without going through the house." Silas joined her, running his hands over the rough walls, searching for any indication of an opening. The smoke was getting thicker, making it hard to breathe. His fingers found a seam in the earth, a wooden frame. "Here," he gasped. Together, he and Victoria pushed against the hidden door. It resisted, then gave way suddenly, sending them both sprawling onto the ground outside. Eleanor scrambled after them, clutching Lily tightly. They crawled away from the burning cabin, staying low to avoid being seen by any of the judge's men who might still be lurking nearby. When they reached the cover of the trees, they stopped to catch their breath. The cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the night sky. "They'll think we died in the fire," Victoria whispered. "That gives us an advantage." Silas nodded, still coughing from the smoke. "We need to move. The horses—" "Gone," Victoria replied grimly. "They either took them or the animals bolted when the fire started." "Then we go on foot," Silas decided, "to the Shoshone camp." Eleanor looked at Lily, who was trembling with fear, but remained blessedly silent. "It's a long way. Can she make it?" "I'll carry her," Silas said. "We'll take turns, but we have to move now while the judge's men are distracted by the fire." They set off into the forest, moving away from the burning cabin and the riders who had nearly claimed their lives. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but they moved forward together, united by a common purpose and the bonds that had formed between them. Silas, leading the way, touched the pine cone in his pocket once more. A promise made. A promise he would keep. The night was long, and dawn still hours away. But somewhere beyond the mountains, Cooper rode for justice. And here in the wilderness, 4 people fought for survival for each other and for the chance to see the judge finally answer for his crimes. The journey had only just begun. He woke to screaming. Silas bolted upright, reaching for his revolver. Dawn light filtered through the trees, revealing Victoria standing a few feet away, her face a mask of anguish. Eleanor was on her knees, frantically searching the area around their makeshift camp. "Lily," she gasped when she saw Silas was awake. "She's gone." Cold dread washed over him. "What? When? How?" "I don't know," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "I woke up and she wasn't here. I only closed my eyes for a moment, I swear." Silas scanned the forest floor, looking for tracks, signs of struggle, anything that might indicate what had happened. The ground was soft, from recent melting snow, and their small footprints leading away from their camp, followed by larger ones. Boot prints. "Someone took her," he said grimly. "The judge's men must have followed us after all." "No," Victoria said, her voice tight with self-recrimination. "She wandered off. Look at the tracks. Lily's prints are alone at first. Then the boot prints join them. She must have woken up and gone exploring." "But why wouldn't she wake one of us?" Eleanor asked, anguish in every word. Before either Silas or Victoria could respond, a rider emerged from the trees, one of the judge's men, his expression triumphant. "Mrs. Whitman," he called, tipping his hat with mock courtesy, "got a message for you from the judge." Eleanor rose slowly to her feet, her face pale but composed. "Where is my daughter?" "Safe. For now." The man produced a folded paper from his coat pocket and tossed it at her feet. "Judge's terms are there. You got till noon. Gallows Hill." With a final smirk, he wheeled his horse around and disappeared back into the forest. Silas retrieved the note, unfolding it with dread. In elegant handwriting it read, "The child for the map. Noon. Gallows Hill. Come alone. Mrs. Whitman, or your daughter, joins her father." "He has my baby," Eleanor whispered, her voice hollow with despair. "Oh God, he has Lily." Silas moved to her side, steadying her as she swayed on her feet. "We'll get her back," he promised, though how he wasn't yet sure. "While we debate, Lily is in that monster's hands," Eleanor cried, "and rushing blindly will only get her killed," Silas replied gently. "The judge wants the map. He won't harm Lily until noon. She's his leverage." "Silas is right," Victoria said. "We need a plan. Something the judge won't expect." As the pale winter sun rose higher, they huddled together, formulating a strategy to save Lily and outmaneuver Judge Blackwood one final time. Gallows Hill stood stark against the winter sky, a bleak reminder of Silver Creek's violent past. The hanging tree, an ancient oak with a massive limb jutting over the hillside, had claimed many lives during the lawless early days of the Silver Rush. Eleanor approached alone as instructed, following the narrow path up the eastern slope. She wore the same blue dress, now rumpled from sleep and travel. The belt containing Edmund's map was clearly visible around her waist. From his position among the rocks to the north of the hill, Silas watched through a brass spyglass, scanning the hilltop for the judge and Lily. There, at the base of the hanging tree, the judge stood with Lily held firmly in front of him. Beside him stood two enforcers from the Silver Spur. Victoria had positioned herself at the southern slope, hidden in the pine forest that extended to the hill's summit. Eleanor reached the summit. She stood a dozen yards from the judge, her posture a mixture of desperation and dignity. "Mama," Lily cried, trying to break free. "Be still, child," the judge commanded. "Your mother and I have business to conclude first." "Let her go," Eleanor demanded. "She's innocent in all this." "No one is innocent, Mrs. Whitman, not even children." His pale eyes flicked to her waist. "You brought the map. Good. Remove the belt and place it on the ground, then back away." Eleanor's hands went to the belt buckle. "How do I know you'll release Lily once you have the map?" "You don't," the judge replied simply. "But you have no choice but to trust me." Silas had reached his position, a natural depression offering both cover and a clear line of sight. He could see the fear in Eleanor's eyes, but also the determination. "Very well," Eleanor said slowly, removing the belt. "But know this, Judge Blackwood. If you harm my daughter, there is nowhere on this earth you can hide from me." The judge laughed coldly. "Brave words from a woman about to die. The belt, Mrs. Whitman. Now." Eleanor placed the belt on the ground and backed away. One of the judge's men retrieved it. The judge examined it, running his fingers over the tooled leather with reverence. "Ingenious," he murmured. "Edmund always was clever with his hands." "He had integrity," Eleanor countered. "Something you wouldn't understand." The judge's expression hardened. "Integrity doesn't build empires, Mrs. Whitman. Vision does." He tucked the belt into his coat. "Unfortunately for you and your daughter, your value ended the moment I obtained this map." He nodded to his men, who drew their knives. "Now, Victoria!" Eleanor cried. From the pine forest, a rifle shot cracked. One of the judge's men fell, clutching his leg. The second whirled, searching for the source of the attack. Silas rose from his hiding place, revolver aimed at the judge, who still held Lily. "Release the child," he commanded. Rather than comply, the judge drew Lily closer, using her as a shield. Then he pulled a small derringer from his sleeve, pressing it to Lily's temple. "Back away, all of you," he commanded. or I swear I'll kill her where she stands." The judge was cornered, desperate, the most dangerous combination possible. "Wait," Silas called, lowering his revolver slightly. "This isn't about the child. It's about the map." "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "A real exchange," Silas replied. "Not the belt that's a fake with altered markings. Eleanor was testing your reaction." It was a desperate bluff, but doubt flickered across the judge's face. "The real map is hidden elsewhere," Silas continued. "I know where. Release Lily, and I'll take you to it." "And why would you do that, Doctor?" "My stake is the child's life," Silas answered honestly. "Nothing more." "He's telling the truth," Eleanor said. "The belt is a decoy. Edmund and I created it in case someone tried to force the map from us." "A clever precaution," the judge admitted. "But how do I know this isn't simply another trap?" "Because I'll go with you alone," Silas offered. "If the map isn't where I say, you can return and do whatever you wish to them." It was a terrible risk, but Silas saw no alternative. After a moment, the judge nodded. "Very well, Doctor. Where is this map?" "My cabin," Silas replied, "hidden in a compartment beneath the floorboards." "Your cabin was destroyed," the judge said. "My men burned it to ashes." "The floor remains," Silas countered, "as does the hidden compartment beneath it. Stone and earth don't burn, Judge Blackwood." "Release the girl to her mother," Silas urged, as a show of good faith. After a moment's hesitation, the judge pushed Lily away. "Go to your mother, child." Lily ran to Eleanor, who swept her into her arms with a sob of relief. "Now, Doctor," the judge said, his voice hardening, "you and I have an appointment." As Silas passed Eleanor and Lily, he murmured, "Take them to the Shoshone. Wait for Cooper." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Silas." "Trust me," he said. Then to Lily, "Remember the pine cone, little one. Keep your mama safe." With a final nod to Victoria, Silas followed the judge down the hillside to where their horses waited. When they arrived at the charred remnants of Silas's cabin, the judge surveyed the destruction with cold satisfaction. "My men are thorough," he remarked. "Now, Doctor, show me this miraculous surviving map." Silas dismounted and knelt beside a section of floor that had partially survived the fire. "The compartment is here, beneath this board." The judge remained mounted the derringer, unwavering. "Open it, then." Silas worked at the board, making a show of effort. "It's warped from the heat," he explained. "Give me a moment." As he worked, his mind raced. The judge would realize the deception soon, and when he did, Silas had no illusions about his own fate. The board came loose, revealing nothing but scorched earth. "Well," the judge demanded, "where is this map?" Silas looked up, meeting the judge's pale eyes without fear. "There is no map here," he admitted, "just as there's no justice in Silver Creek while you rule it." The judge's face darkened. "You've sealed your fate, Doctor." "Perhaps," Silas agreed. "But I've saved the child, and soon Cooper will return with federal authorities." "Cooper," the judge spat. "Another traitor. No matter. He'll never reach Laramie alive." "What do you mean?" The judge smiled thinly. "Did you think I wouldn't have men watching the trails after your little performance? Cooper was followed. Intercepted. The evidence is now ash, just like your cabin." "You're lying," Silas said flatly. "Am I? Then where is your federal marshal Cooper, supposedly left for Laramie a day and a half ago? The ride takes half a day at most." Doubt grew in Silas's mind. Cooper should have reached Laramie by now. "Even if Cooper failed," Silas said, "there's still the map, the real map. Eleanor and Victoria are beyond your reach." For the moment, the judge conceded. But I control this territory. Every trail, every pass. They won't get far. He raised the derringer, aiming at Silas's chest. And you won't be alive to help them. You can kill me, Judge, but you can't kill the truth. And the truth is that you're a murderer, a thief and a coward who uses children as shields. The crack of the derringer was deafening. Silas felt the impact like a hammer blow driving him backward onto the ashes of his former home. Pain bloomed, stealing his breath. The judge holstered the weapon and rode away without a backward glance. As consciousness faded, Silas's hand moved to his pocket fingers, closing around the pine cone Lily had given him. His last thought was of the child's solemn eyes as she made him promise to keep her safe. A promise kept, though, at the highest cost. He was floating in darkness, peaceful and warm. No pain, no fear, no responsibility. Then a voice. "Silas! Silas, wake up." Eleanor's voice, pleading, desperate. With immense effort, Silas clawed his way back to consciousness. Pain greeted him, a burning agony in his chest that made each breath a torment. He opened his eyes to find Eleanor leaning over him, her face streaked with tears and ash. The sky was darkening. He had been unconscious for hours. "Eleanor," he managed. "The judge," he said, "Cooper." "Cooper is alive," Eleanor assured him. "Victoria found him on the trail to Laramie wounded, but alive." The judge's men attacked him, but they underestimated him. He managed to hide the evidence before they caught up to him. "And the marshal, on his way," Eleanor said. "Victoria rode to Laramie herself after helping Cooper to the Shoshone camp. The marshal should be in Silver Creek by morning." Silas tried to sit up, only to be halted by a wave of agony. Looking down, he saw a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his chest. "Don't move," Eleanor instructed. "The bullet missed your heart, but it's lodged near your lung. I did what I could with the supplies in your saddlebags, but you need a real doctor." "I am a real doctor," Silas muttered, the attempt at humor undermined by blood on his lips. "Lily," he asked. "Safe with the Shoshone," Eleanor assured him. "I shouldn't have left her, but I had to find you." "Why did you do it?" she asked after a moment. "Offer yourself to the judge like that. Because you and Lily deserve a future. Because the judge needed to be stopped. Because," he hesitated, "because you made me remember what it was to care. To be human again." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "And now you might die for it." "Better to die. For something that matters," Silas replied, "than to live for nothing." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. She tensed, but relaxed upon recognizing the rider's Victoria Cooper, despite his injuries, and 4 men wearing federal badges. "Marshal Taylor," Victoria introduced the leader, a grizzled man with hard eyes. "He insisted on coming immediately when he heard the judge had shot you." The marshal knelt beside Silas. "Dr. Morgan," he acknowledged. "Sheriff Cooper told me what you've done. For justice in Silver Creek." "The judge," Eleanor asked. "Returned to Silver Creek," Marshal Taylor replied. "Likely preparing to flee. But he won't get far. My men have the town surrounded." Victoria approached. "We should get Dr. Morgan to the Shoshone camp," she said. "Their medicine man may be able to help until we can get him to a proper surgeon." A makeshift travois was constructed, and Silas was carefully transferred onto it. As the deputies prepared to depart for the Shoshone camp, Victoria embraced Eleanor. "I'll see this through," she promised, "for Edmund, for Lily, for all of us." Eleanor walked beside the travois, her hand resting on Silas's arm. Despite the pain, Silas felt a profound peace settle over him. Whatever happened now, whether he lived or died, he had found his way back to the man he once was. The healer, the protector, the man who cared. And in Eleanor's eyes he saw the possibility of a future he had believed forever closed to him. 3 days later, Silas opened his eyes to the soft glow of morning light filtering through a hide-covered opening. He lay in a Shoshone lodge, the pain in his chest now a persistent ache rather than consuming agony. A small movement caught his attention. Lily sat cross-legged beside his pallet, arranging pine needles into patterns on a square of buckskin. When she noticed he was awake, her face lit up with joy. "Mama," she called, "Mr. Silas is awake." Eleanor appeared in the lodge entrance, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Welcome back," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You had us worried." "The judge?" he asked after sipping water from the cup she offered. Eleanor's expression turned grave. "Dead. He refused to surrender to the marshal. Tried to shoot his way out." Silas absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Justice had been served, yet the cost had been high. "Victoria and Cooper are fine." Eleanor continued answering his unasked question. "Victoria has returned to Silver Creek to deal with the aftermath. Cooper is here recovering. The marshal has appointed him acting county judge until a replacement can be sent." Lily patted Silas's hand. "I kept your pine cone safe," she announced, producing it from her pocket, "while the medicine man was fixing you." Silas smiled. "Thank you, Lily. It helped me find my way back." Lily nodded, accepting this as perfect sense. "That's what pine cones do," she said wisely. "They show you the way home." Eleanor sent Lily to inform Cooper of Silas's recovery, leaving them alone. "Victoria has offered us a home in Silver Creek," she said. "The Silver Spur is hers legally now. She wants to turn it into a respectable hotel." A smile touched her lips. "She's also pressing Cooper to ensure Edmund's claim is properly recorded. Lily will have her inheritance." "And you?" Silas asked. "What do you want?" Eleanor's expression softened. "A safe home for Lily. A place where we can build a future without fear." She hesitated. "And I've learned something else in these past days, that I don't want to build that future alone. When the judge shot you when I thought I might lose you," her voice wavered, "I realized how quickly you've become essential to us. To me." Silas's heart hammered in his chest. "I'm not the man I once was," he warned. "The war, Sarah's death. They changed me." "Life changes all of us," Eleanor replied. "Edmund's death changed me. Finding you changed me." She smiled through tears. "Perhaps we can change together from now on." Silas reached up, cupping her cheek. "I'd like that," he said simply. "But first you need to heal," Eleanor added. "Silver Creek needs a doctor, Silas Morgan, a good one." "Is that a prescription, Mrs. Whitman?" Silas asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "It is indeed, Dr. Morgan," Eleanor replied, her own smile widening. Lily returned with Cooper, whose arm was in a sling, but whose face brightened at seeing Silas awake. "Doc," he greeted. "Good to see those eyes open." "Cooper, heard you've been promoted." Cooper grimaced. "Temporarily, until someone who knows the law can take over." His expression grew serious, but long enough to make sure Edmund's claim is properly recorded, and to begin cleaning up the judge's mess. "It's a big mess," Silas observed. "Yes," Cooper agreed, "which is why we need good people to stay. People like a certain doctor who's remembered what it means to care about others." Lily looked up at this. "Are you going to stay with us, Mr. Silas?" she asked, hope shining in her blue eyes. "In our new house." Silas looked from Lily to Eleanor, seeing in both their faces the same question, the same hope. "Yes," he said, reaching out to take Lily's small hand in one of his and Eleanor's in the other. "I'm staying." Outside, snow began to fall again, not the violent blizzard that had brought Eleanor and Lily to his door, but a gentle snowfall that blanketed the world in quiet beauty. Winter still held the land in its grip, but beneath the snow seeds waited patiently for spring. Seeds of healing, seeds of justice, seeds of love. And like the pine cone that had sheltered and protected them, Silas Morgan, Eleanor Whitman, and Lily Whitman had weathered the storm together. Now they would face whatever came next the same way, together.